I am going to begin by talking about a book that I wrote with Jerome Carabell, which was published quite a while ago, 1989. It tells you about the history of community colleges. Then I'll talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of community colleges in terms of a place to start higher post-secondary education. We'll talk specifically about issues of transfer, which are the greatest challenges for community colleges. And then finally, I'll talk about some policies that I believe would improve community colleges. Okay, so that's the agenda for today. I'm standing on my toes, so I'm going to move this down a bit. Okay, so Carabell and I wrote a book called The Diverted Dream. I don't expect anybody has read that book, but if anybody has, raise your hand. Okay, well, bravo. Okay, great. So I'm going to tell you about the book. The book actually is a history of community colleges. Can anybody tell me why did community colleges, when did they start and why did they start? Anybody have an idea about that? Actually, they were called junior colleges at the very beginning. Any ideas about what gave rise to community colleges? Yes.
It was the post-war.
It was the post-World War II?
I thought it was all the veterans coming home.
Okay. All the veterans coming home after World War II is an answer. Anybody else? Well, actually, they started right around the turn of the 20th century. And a lot of people think that, and I'm going to use the term junior college because they were called junior colleges at the beginning. And they only gradually, by the 1960s, it was pretty widely accepted to call them community colleges. But it took a while. And the beginnings of community colleges, the very first one is in 1901, right at the turn of the 20th century. And the reason that started, many people think community colleges started because there was a demand for more education among people who had previously not had the opportunity to attend higher education. So there's a kind of consumer demand story out there. But as a matter of fact, the beginnings of community colleges had to do with a handful of university presidents and deans who were interested in keeping students from going to their elite colleges. They started community colleges to create a kind of barrier institution that would divert students from attending four-year colleges. And so they were the great sponsors, and in fact, this fella here, it's on your left, William Rainey Harper, was the president of the University of Chicago, and he's the one who started the very first community college in Joliet, Illinois. The other two fellas are Alexis Lang and David Starr Jordan, and they were both in California. And California was the center of the growth of junior colleges at least through the 1920s. These two fellas were very instrumental. Jordan was the president of Stanford, and Lang was a dean at the University of California, Berkeley, and they both followed Harper in wanting to keep students away, keeping students away from their colleges and other four-year institutions. Our book talks not only about the beginning of the community colleges, but why they made a transition from being predominantly liberal arts and transfer oriented to being predominantly occupational, vocational, training oriented. And we dispute that the colleges were transformed either because business wanted workers with the skills that community colleges could provide, or because consumers wanted to more occupationally relevant skills. In the book, we dispute both of those ideas. And we show that the business, there may be a few local businesses that were interested in junior colleges, but overall business had little interest in junior colleges. And they were on the sidelines. And the consumers, that is the students, were mainly interested in transfer because transfer was thought to be kind of the cultural ideal. The getting the baccalaureate degree was the cultural ideal. And just as many of you are going to try to get the PhD, that's kind of a new cultural ideal, but at that time, getting the baccalaureate was the big thing. And so students were glued into that idea. What happened was that the community college leaders, and we call them the community college Vanguard, here are some of the early leaders of the community college movement. This guy is Walter Crosby Eales. This guy is Doak Campbell and Edmund Gleaser. I could not find a picture of the other guy who was very important, was Leonard Coos. Not important to remember those names necessarily, but they saw that they were in a structural position. Four-year colleges and universities really didn't want their students. We're talking about at the beginning, the early days, in the early 1900s. And most of the students they felt would be terminal in practice, if not in their own minds. In other words, they either didn't have the money or they didn't have the preparation to actually go on to a four-year college and get a degree at a four-year college. And we're not talking about now, remember, we're talking about it at the beginning of this movement. And so Crosby, Eales said, they're terminal in fact, if not in their own minds, and we need to do something for them. And that something was occupational and vocational training. And so all of you who are at community college know that there are a lot of occupational courses for people who are planning to get an associate's degree and not go on to a four-year college. So you can get a nursing degree, electronics technician, air conditioning and heating degree, all kinds of different things for an occupational AA. Those did not exist until these fellas invented the idea of semi-professional occupations. I mean, they were out there in the labor market, but they gave a name to them. They developed curricula for them. And they developed mechanisms to redirect students who mostly were interested, like I say, in moving on to four-year colleges and getting baccalaureate degrees. So they developed mechanisms for redirecting students into occupational programs. And those mechanisms included, of course, the development of new curricula in these brand new credentialized occupational programs, career-related counseling and testing. So you get like a occupational interest test, and then you see the counselor. Counselor would say, well, I see that you have an aptitude for this kind of occupation, give it a try. And then, of course, they try to develop connections with employers so that the students who would be in these curricula would have opportunities to get jobs. So all of this whole structure didn't come out of nowhere. It was developed out of the minds of people like Leonard Coos and Eales, Walter Crosby Eales, and Doak Campbell. Again, California was really the innovator here. The first meetings of we used to call the American Junior College Association, were all in California because California was the model for the rest of the states, and it was a model specifically in not only having a lot of students go to junior colleges, but to direct them into occupationally relevant curricula. Okay. So there they are again. There was a turning point right around 1970, where you went from a minority of students enrolled in the occupational programs to a majority of students enrolled in the occupational programs. And you can see during that decade, from 1970 to 1980, there was a switchover from under half to nearly 2/3 enrolled in occupational programs. And I don't want to say these programs are all bad by any means. Many of them are do lead to well-paying jobs. Overall, they don't look good when you compare them to a bachelor's degree, but they're not all bad. But we were interested in, why is it, even in the face of resistance of students wanting to get a bachelor's degree, these kinds of programs became dominant in community colleges. That was one of our interests. And the reasons were that there was a declining market at this time for college graduates, so college graduates were having a harder time getting jobs. A lot of that, we were entering a kind of stagflation period in the 1970s. A lot of inflation and also flat economic growth. Kind of like after the big recession. Big recession, students had a hard time getting jobs. Well, the same thing happened in the 1970s. The President Nixon, discovered community colleges and thought they were a great thing, because at that time there were a lot of students who were protesting in universities against the war in Vietnam, and they thought, like, well, community college students weren't protesting, they were going to go on and get jobs and be a more conservative group. The major philanthropies that supported community colleges, like the Kellogg Foundation, discovered them as kind of mechanisms for organizing labor markets, and they jumped on board and helped out with at that time it became the AACJC, the American Association of Community and Junior Colleges. And then the mechanisms of redirection were by this time becoming perfected. And so students both had the incentive to get occupational training, because the college students were having trouble getting jobs. There was a lot of money coming into community colleges from foundations and government, and then the organizations themselves, the community colleges themselves, had developed all this testing apparatus and advising apparatus to help direct students into those programs. So, we asked in the book whether community colleges were more about democratization, that is, helping students who would otherwise not have the opportunity to go to college, or were they more about diversion, that is, keeping students out of four-year colleges and universities, and thereby limiting their opportunities for social mobility. And I think we tilted in the book, as you can tell from the title, or if you remember the title, The Diverted Dream, towards the diversion story. But there was some democratization too, because there were a whole bunch of students who couldn't afford to go to college, who could afford to go to community college. Community college, basically open access at that time, were almost no fees to go to in most states. But some of the issues and why diversion was for us the kind of primary consequence, was because you had a lot of students coming in who were less prepared, who didn't have as much money, and so there were compositional reasons why either dropping out or finishing with an occupational associate's degree would have been favored, and some of them were organizational problems. There were failures to focus resources on helping students transfer or to stay closely connected with either employers or universities, and that created a situation where lots of community college students didn't actually finish any degree, but dropped out before completing any degree. David told me that if you have questions, by the way, during my talk, you should raise your hand and ask them, and then there'll be time for questions also at the end. Okay, so so that's, in a nutshell, that's what Carabelle and I wrote about in 1989. And that was a story that we told, and obviously a lot has happened since 1989 when the book was published. I want to just briefly talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages before I go into talking about the particular issues about transfer. And since everybody in this room is either a transfer student, I mean, there may be some exceptions, there may be a few teachers and administrators here, but basically you're either a transfer student or you're planning to transfer. I think that the issues about transfer are going to be maybe particularly of interest. And I do want to emphasize, even though it's tough to transfer, people who do transfer to four-year universities do just as well as the students who start. So you shouldn't feel like you're at a disadvantage if you get there. The point is, a lot of people never get there, and that's a big issue going forward. Okay, well, most of you know the advantages of community colleges. You've probably all thought about almost all of these, right? They're low cost relative to four-year college tuition. They're convenient, they're close to home. Many people live at home while attending community college. They're open admission, so you don't have to have any particular grade point average to get in community college. They have smaller classes than most at university. You're going to find that when you go to university, especially in social science and some popular majors like biology, they're huge classes, like hundreds. People can get lost in these huge classes. That's not true of community colleges. There are many options. You can you can take courses to transfer, or you can take courses to get an occupational degree. You can try courses that maybe just for recreational interests. Most people who work in community colleges are very committed to the Access mission. They really are strong advocates for giving people opportunities to people who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to go to any college. So you've got very committed people in the community colleges by and large. And there's some very well-paid occupations, like those listed here, that are connected to the occupational program. So community colleges have a lot going for them. And the leaders of the community college movement that I showed you, Eels and Campbell and Gleaser and Coos, they were very aware of why the institutions could be popular. And they could be popular for these reasons. Put this away. So, what are the problems? Okay. Most who enter a community college never even get to 12 credit units. That's either because of lack of preparation, family issues, only being half-hearted in motivation, but most don't even get 12 degree credits. The great majority of faculty members are part-time, so they're kind of either going between a regular job and teaching in community college, or they're going between a lot of different colleges, and so they don't necessarily have that rooted feeling for either the students or the campus. The advisor caseloads nowadays can be 1,000 students or even more to 1. The National Advising Association recommends 300 to 1 ratio. Most students are not full-time, so peer motivation and peer preparation can be an issue. If you're surrounded by people who are not that interested in school, or their work is impinging or their family is impinging on their studies to a greater degree, in a way that can be a good thing, and you can stand out maybe more easily if you're a committed student, but also that has some negative consequences because you're surrounded by peers who are not as maybe engaged with studies, and can be a tendency to disengage if your friends are all kind of disengaged. Yes?
What's the advisor caseload at UC system?
It does vary from place to place, but it's a lot closer to 300 to 1. We had, like some of we have different colleges. Like we have the College of Engineering, the College of Science, College of Humanities. And the advisor caseloads, sometimes can get pretty high, but that's mostly because they haven't found a new advisor to hire. So I've seen 600 to 1 on occasion, but mostly they're 300 to 1, 400 to 1, something like that. And they're advisors in every department. So classes are not always offered in a timely way. Many of you have had the experience of needing the class and it not being offered when you need it. So slowing down your degree progression, and if your degree progression gets slowed down, there's also a greater chance that you might not actually finish because something else will pop up. And then remedial math has been a huge problem in community college. Most people who have to take remedial math never get out of remedial math. Yes?
I just wanted to add about the classes not always being offered in a timely way.
Yeah.
So I needed to take one more math class to transfer with differential equations.
Yes.
It got filled up at my home institution, so I had to find out a way. Like I emailed the professors and they're like, sorry, I can't help you out. Like I'm full, and people have been emailing me all week about it. And so I had to go find another community college that was 45 minutes away. And so not only is like the class not being offered, you have to put other like time and resources into being able to attain those classes.
How many has had situations something like that? Yeah, see, that's about a majority in the room. And so that story is a terrible story, but it's not rare. Not rare. Okay, so here's some sort of shocking statistics about institutional stratification and social stratification. 82% of new white enrollments. This is from 1995 through about 2012. So it's these guys looked at it, new enrollments during that period, almost a 10-year period. 82% of white enrollments went to the top 450 or so four-year colleges, the ones who had some degree of selectivity. And 72% of Hispanic and 68% of African American enrollments went to community colleges. So, you've got institutional stratification and you've got racial ethnic stratification imposed on institutional or coinciding with institutional stratification. That's an issue. There are some issues of teaching and learning in community colleges. I know this is, I don't want to be a real downer here, but I'm afraid that there are some problems. And I heard from David that some of you are planning in your research to stay community colleges, and so it's a good thing to be aware of the issues that community colleges face. They're doing good work for a lot of people. I don't want to say they aren't, but they do face a lot of problems. And some of them are, there are some tremendous classrooms, really, where people are learning a tremendous amount, where there's a great enthusiasm and the motivation is there and the teachers are fantastic. And there's, but this is Norton Grubb, who's unfortunately passed away, but he did a study and almost at the turn of, near 2000, and he found that a quarter of the classrooms that he looked at, he called collapsed. That is, that not much learning was happening. Content was converted to simple facts and slogans, anecdote swapping, like, you know, here's something that happened to me, this is my experience, and teachers doing the same thing instead of real analysis and discussion, and humor employed as a substitute for problem solving, like low intellectually oriented classrooms. That was a quarter at the time that Grubb was talking. And you can see, let me just, I'll get your question. You can see at that time, which is now almost 20 years ago, very common to have 5 to 8 pages a week of reading and essays when they were assigned 2 to 4 pages long. When you go to the university, you're going to find that isn't true. There are a lot more reading and there's a lot longer essays, and so the preparation is, at least at the time when Grubb was looking at it, and he looked at hundreds of classrooms, it was lagging. Yes?
I just want to know is that how do you identify, you know, humor from
How do you identify humor?
from solving problems and things like that?
Yeah, well, okay, so humor is obviously not a bad thing. And any good teacher is going to try to use some humor in their teaching. And when students are laughing about things, they're engaged. That's one form of engagement. And so effective teachers do use humor. But according to Grubb, there was a lot of joking around in these, remember, it's just a quarter of the classrooms. A lot of joking around, a lot of telling of humorous stories, and much less in the way of like, well, let's take a problem. Let's sit down and either individually or in a group solve the problem. Yeah, this is a Grubb formulation. I don't know exactly how he measured humor. You know, I guess you could count the number of times people laughed in class. I don't think he did that though. So it's a good question. I mean, it's a good question. But but I think at least one important point is, these are the kinds of things that he was observing in that quarter of classrooms that were not working well. And I want to say there are some classrooms at university that don't work well either. So it's not limited to community college. Somebody had a question, yes?
Just going on that humor thing, was that more of something that happened in social sciences rather than STEM? Because I've taken a fair amount of each, and I just don't see how humor really could be implemented in STEM. You know,
Well, they should, but they should have at least a little humor, but you're probably right. I don't know, I haven't looked at Grubb's, you know, I don't think Norton Grubb actually broke it down between STEM and social science. You're probably right, though. I've visited a lot of STEM classrooms and they're pretty much all business, the ones that I've seen. Yes, okay. So moving right along here. Want to say a few things about transfer. And transfer is kind of is an issue for community colleges. There's many ways of calculating transfer. If you just look at anybody who steps foot in a community college at any time, no matter how long they last, transfer is probably under 10% nationally. If you look at people who have taken at least 12 units of credit, which is a typical thing that researchers say that shows some degree of commitment to actually being in the college, you get through 12 units of credit, then the transfer rate is, you know, depends year to year, but it's about 20 to 25%. Okay, and so it's clear, like when you ask students, do you want to transfer? At the very beginning, when they first enter community college, like 75–80% say yes. So it's clear that large proportion who say they want to transfer are not actually transferring. Now, maybe they found along the way something that's much better for them. You know, that's possible. But a huge number don't get any credential or any degree. And so we're going to focus a little bit on transfer for the next couple of minutes. This is Judy Scott Clayton described it as trying to transfer from community college is the equivalent of navigating a shapeless river on a dark night. Maybe that's overly dramatic, but we have, even in California, where the California Master Plan of 1960 was set up the 3 tiers, the community colleges, the state colleges, and UC. They anticipated that half of upper division students would be community college transfers. That never happened. Never happened because most people who entered community college never got out of community college or never finished a degree, much less transfer. So there is an issue there. There's an issue on an economic perspective. These are slightly out of date numbers, but you can see that as compared to those who complete an AA, the average, this is on average, the mean person earns over the course of a lifetime $700,000 more if they get a BA, a bachelor's degree over an associate's degree. There are some associate's degrees that are very high paying, and there are some bachelor's degrees that are very low paying. So we're not talking like every four-year college student is going to do better out there in the labor market than every community college student. Not true. Not at all true. But so we're just talking about on average, okay? And it really depends a lot on the field you study. The top fields now are all engineering fields, actually, and science. And so if even in community college, if you do something that's kind of science related, like nursing, you can do very well, or electronics technology can do very well. But and then the gap is even larger, as you can see, if you enter community college, don't complete any credential, and as compared to people who get a bachelor's degree. I misspoke. So the top is like 550,000 BA over AA, and the bottom 700,000 BA over people who enter but never complete anything. Okay, that's over the course of a lifetime. Little point about where transfer rates are highest. Transfer rates are highly connected to the wealth of the community. All of the highest transfer, and California has a pretty high, decent transfer. This is anybody who starts at a community college, so it's not the finishing 12 degrees that many researchers use. If you look at it, every single one of the top ones is located in a wealthy community in California, and the same thing is true at the bottom end. The ones where transfer rates are lowest are in the poorest communities in California. Okay, question?
Yeah, but is that just really reflecting the wealth of the community? I know that I go to Santa Monica College, and most of my friends, they drive in from parts of the city. So it's like, it's just kids self-selecting where they want to do it.
Another good question. Okay, that's another good question. We're making an inference here, and that inference might not be correct. But most people who attend community college attend the community college closest to their home. There are people, like you say, who select into a different community college. That does definitely happen, but so that's actually an interesting research question. That might be something you might want to pursue. Like which colleges are the ones they're attracting students from outside of the local community. And that might be these too. These would probably, I guess, would be high. because, people say, oh, these are community colleges from which it's pretty common to transfer.
When we're looking at transfer rate, are we looking at within a certain number of years?
3 years, yes. Thank you. Okay. These are all within 3 years. And some people do take 4 or 5 years and then transfer.
As far as the locations, being more affluent in places that are higher, also people in higher transfer rates. You also have to think about the market or the demographic of those who are living in the area, the instructors who are living in that area, and the colleges that are struggling. So for instance, they went to UCLA, got their graduate degree and everything, and they live in the area, most likely they would go to either UCLA or SMC or to teach. So it kind of stays within the sphere. But when you have transfer, and I'm coming in from Linkage, and I took SMC classes, and I took LBCC classes. LBCC classes are a lot easier. I mean, it is not even funny how much easier they are than SMC classes. And it is because of the instructors. The instructors over at the SMC campus were much more detailed. I mean, they put the workload on you, and they really focused. But when you look at their background, they are also university instructors. So that's what I've also noticed.
I think that's an excellent point. I think that's something that almost certainly is true. You've got, in Silicon Valley, you probably got people from Berkeley and Stanford who are teaching there, and that's probably, undoubtedly, I'm guessing you're right. I haven't looked into it, but that's another good research topic. But I'm guessing you're right. Okay, so I want to just conclude by talking about some policies that could improve opportunities. I mean, when we talk about opportunities in community college, we're saying it's open access, but we're not talking about really opportunities to complete or to transfer. Those are not as, there's not as many of those kinds of opportunities, or at least they're not realized. And so here, I'm going to first talk about focus, and then I'm going to talk about linkages. And I'm going to quote here Kevin Doherty, wrote a book in 1994 called The Contradictory College. He says, the community college suffers from a diffusion of goals and inadequate means to reach the goals. They seek to be all things to all people. They succeed well at some purposes, but not at others. And because the transfer function is the most difficult, it's especially adversely affected by this diffusion of goals and the lack of concentration of resources. And you see what he's saying is, it's like, this is the hardest thing they do. And if you're doing a lot of things and you're spread thin and you're not concentrating resources on the hardest thing you do, that could be a problem. So focus. Many people have advocated trying to focus community colleges a little more tightly on around a certain number of curricula and maybe fewer curricular options, making sure the course is offered regularly so you don't have that experience having to travel 45 minutes to get your class you need, have streamlined and well understood degree and credential pathways, and don't have a million of them. And make sure that there are mechanisms that allow students not to get off track. So pre-populated course plans. Here is your course plan for the next 2 years. We promise that these courses are going to be offered when we say they're going to be offered. And we're going to have enough of them to accommodate everyone who wants them. So that's one set of kind of policies that could help. The problem with trying to be everything to everybody is you can't be the important thing to people that need that important thing. It's not the most articulate way to put it, but I think you get the idea. I hope you do. Focus was number one thing. Linkage is another. And here I'm going to cite another scholar, James Rosenbaum, in his colleagues. They said the community college's faith in the power of credentials too often substitutes for concrete social contacts. Community colleges do not ask employers about the skills and abilities they require. They don't prepare students with social know-how about how to obtain and keep jobs. They don't have strong connections with four-year colleges either, as I'm going to talk about. So I'll talk about career linkages, and I'll talk about educational linkages with four-year universities. Okay, career linkages, Rosenbaum had a very interesting say because he compared community colleges to proprietary or for-profit colleges. And some for-profit colleges are terrible. But he looked at some of the best ones like IT, T-Tech, and DeVry, and he said those for-profits were doing certain things that community colleges weren't doing and were advantageous for their students. So some of the things that they were doing, the faculty were required at these for-profits to have contacts with employers so that they could send their students to the employers, and there would be these direct linkages between the school and jobs. Now, a lot of community colleges have advisory boards of local employers, but they often don't meet. They're moribund, they're dead. There's no incentives to have those kinds of connections. And when Rosenbaum says they have faith that if you take our courses, you get a degree, you'll automatically get a job. But anybody who's gotten a job knows that getting a job often works through, actual social contacts. So they're saying community colleges should hire staff who have those, are given incentives to have those kind of contacts. Another thing they point to is there's not much in terms of reading and writing skills in the occupational programs, and so sometimes students come out of those programs without the literacy skills that employers actually want and need. So that's something else. And then social know-how, he has an amusing part of that, I thought it was an amusing part of the book, where he says, nobody tells kids that, you shouldn't have tattoos, or at least exposed tattoos when you're trying to get a job, and you shouldn't have loud music on your answering machine, and in case some employer calls you, they're going to be turned off by certain things. So social know-how. And he said, these for-profits do teach social know-how. They teach how to present yourself to an employer, dress, demeanor, some of these other, small things. Community colleges should do it. Okay? That would be another kind of preparation. And then educational linkages. And this is the last slide, and then we'll take some questions. In community colleges that are branches, they're designated as two-year branches of four-year universities, as most are in Indiana and Montana. There is a higher transfer rate because the two-year college is institutionally connected to the university. In other states like Florida, but now there are 15 other states, the course numbering at university and at community college for the same courses are exactly the same. So there's no issue about transferring credits. You take Soc 101 at community college, that's exactly equivalent to Soc 101 at the university. And so there is some evidence that suggests that transfer rates are higher and time to completion is shorter when you have, now of course, you want to have equal content in those courses too, so that the students are well prepared for the next course in the sequence. But the states that have done that, it seems like that has a positive impact. Okay, well, I lied. This is the last slide. Sorry. You're all ready for the last slide now. I've launched one more at you. But this is, another thing that Arizona State University has done is they've just tried to create clear pathways, very clear to the community colleges that where they get a lot of students, exactly what the students need to take, the sequence of courses they need to take, how they're going to link to the majors at the university, and they develop these ways for students to track their progress through electronic means, and these tools might also. So that, again, it's a way of connecting the community college to the university very closely, because the people at the university are tracking the progress for the students at community college, saying you're on track for getting your 4-year degree once you transfer. So those are linkage issues. Okay, now time for questions. Yes. No, in the middle there.
So, looking at what you talked about policies, like I work in a community college doing a bridge program, transfer bridge program. It's kind of trying to do the similar sort of policies. But we're kind of dealing with, we're a small program within a larger college. And then also too is, that's what I'm also doing my research on, is kind of looking at the disconnect between policies and like what's actually working. One of the things I noticed even with my own program, that the students who are doing the best and who are transferring at a higher rate are the students who are actually like also in like CTE programs, like career programs. So they're looking at long-term goals versus just short-term goals. And so those are the ones who are actually having a big success rate. However, when I'm like looking at the college itself, there seems to be like this disconnect between what's actually working and what we need to do to make policy changes to continue those sort of lines of success. What do you suggest as far as actually enacting, like I've read a lot of literature, like I've been like talked to like ASU, and like I've like see what a lot of schools are really stepping up on the 4-year level to kind of like bridge that gap even out of state, because we build a lot of out of state schools, and they're like, okay, we work with you on articulation, but yeah, at the community college level, at least at my school, there's still this disconnect of how you were saying, like trying to spread ourselves too thin, or trying not really focusing, or not understanding, the research that's already out there. So.
Yes. So the question, I'm going to repeat the question. If I understand it correctly, is there are programs on community colleges that are very successful, and there's particular institutions that are doing a good job of articulation, but the message isn't getting through to a lot of people on the community college campuses, or how to maximize the success of the programs that are working well, or to broaden their scope. And
Administrative level.
At the administrative level. And so what do you do about that? That's a tough one. And I think it, in some ways goes back to something I was saying, which is when you're spread very thin and you don't have a lot of resources to work with in the beginning, there's a tendency of administrators to be putting out fires, or to be responding to the latest thing from the state, the latest initiative from the state, and not to have the time or the staff to say, okay, let's do a really clear evaluation of what's working for our students, and let's put some more resources and some more staff into those programs. It's really, at some level, it's both this problem that Doherty has talked about, being spread too thin, but also not having time to really do the analysis to say, we know this is working well, and now we have scarce resources, but let's try to build this up. More than that, it's just hard to know. I think it's some of the things about focusing on a smaller number of curricula and might be helpful. Yes.
I want to bring it back to that one of the earlier first slides that you had, where we kind of talked about what the classroom looked like with the order and thing, what anecdotes and humor and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you could give us any type of advice you have, as because I still got classes to take at the community college, and
Yeah.
Now I'm looking at that, and I'm like, wow, my biggest fear is that I entered at 25. So it's like, well, how would I change that discussion?
Well, yeah, that's a great, okay, so David's reminding me to repeat the question, and that's very important. So the question is, Norton Grubb found 25 classrooms, 25% of classrooms were what he called collapsed, where there wasn't intense learning happening.
I want to raise the roof.
And, right, and so the question is, how do you avoid those classrooms, because you want to be prepared to be successful when you transfer? Is there like a shopping period at all? Like, can you sample, go in, sample the course for a time or two, and then drop it if you can't really do that?
I think it's more like I've already landed in the class. How do I, like do damage control?
I would say talk to the professor. Say, look, I'm planning to transfer. I want to be prepared. Long-term success is on my mind. And I don't feel like, you can have to say this in a diplomatic way, right? I'm not certain that the requirements in this course are going to prepare me for the my next step. Can I do extra reading? Can I write a longer paper? Can I meet with you to talk about that extra reading? And you can raise the bar. And I think most professors or instructors are going to be receptive to that. I mean, I have rarely encountered students who have said that to me, but I've jumped up and down with delight when I have. Because there's somebody who is really, really thinking ahead, and has their own interests at heart. So I think if you did that, you would stand out, and people would say yes. I really do. Other questions or comments? Yes, David?
If I recall correctly, from your book, you were mentioning how these leaders from the University of California and Stanford and Chicago and all these other places, they advocated for creating community colleges so that they wouldn't have to increase enrollment after selecting colleges.
Yeah.
Do they also advocate for community colleges to switch to terminal focus?
So the question was, these early university presidents who sponsored the development of community colleges, like William Rainey Harper at Chicago and David Starr Jordan at Stanford, did they also advocate the terminal occupational degrees and shifting most of the students into those types of programs? The research suggests that was a later step, and that was the thinking of these people that in the book we call them the junior college vanguard. That they were like the vanguard group that designed that shift. So people like Leonard Coos and Walter Crosby Eales, who were, they started writing at around the same time right when community colleges were picking up. So they were the 1910s, 1920s. Some of them lived a long time, so they were writing in the 1930s too. And here's how you can design a community. Their work was about here's how to design a community college that is, they called comprehensive. But what they meant by comprehensive was mostly occupational, vocational. And here's how to do it. So they were the theorists, if you will, not Harper and not Jordan. They were just, let's have these other colleges and hope that people are happy with 2 years of education. That was the view of Harper and Jordan.